Hello and welcome. Today we delve into a story shrouded in mystery and tragedy, the brutal sinking of a Japanese convoy in the Bismarck Sea during March of 1943. An operation marked by strategic planning, deadly deception, and catastrophic failure. But what if I told you that beneath the chaos, there are secrets hidden in the wreckage that could rewrite what we think we know about this battle? Could the true scale of the destruction be even greater than the official reports suggest? Was there a covert element in the attack that remains undisclosed to this day? How did the Japanese convoy, confident and well-prepared, become so thoroughly decimated in a matter of hours? And what role did groundbreaking innovations like skip bombing and advanced cryptography truly play in shaping the outcome? All these pieces point to one question: what really happened in the icy waters of the Bismarck Sea that March morning? In this video, we will trace every step of the operation, separating fact from fiction, revealing hidden details, and uncovering the shocking truth behind one of the most intense naval encounters of the Pacific War. The full story is waiting to be uncovered, and it begins right now. On the morning of March 3rd, in the year 1943, precisely at 10:15 hours, a grim and somber scene unfolded amidst the vast expanse of the Bismarck Sea, approximately 30 nautical miles northwest of the remote and rugged coastline of Lille in the territory of New Guinea. In the icy grip of a moment marked by chaos and despair, a Japanese naval officer's hand, darkened and oil-streaked from corrosion and the relentless assault of war, trembled involuntarily as he clutched the fragmented, splintered remnants of what had once constituted a vital part of the destroyer Arashio's bridge. His uniform was soaked through with a mixture of fuel oil, brine, and the bitter salt water of the sea, a grim testament to the violence that had just transpired. The officer, haunted by the horrors unfolding before him, carried within his mind a haunting record of words and images that would remain etched deep into his memory, tormenting him for the rest of his days. Through eyes burned raw by salt and smoke, he watched in stunned silence as American B-25 Mitchell bombers swooped and soared in deadly circles above the debris field that stretched endlessly across the sea. An apocalyptic landscape marred by oil slicks, burning wreckages, and hundreds, perhaps thousands, of soldiers desperately fighting to cling to remnants of anything that floated amid the chaos and destruction. The convoy, which just 2 days earlier had departed Rabaul with such confidence and determination, was now reduced to a tragic and pitiful shadow of its former self. Its battered and broken remnants drifted in the forlorn expanse of the ocean as the surviving sailors and soldiers realized, almost too late, that their ordeal was far from over and that the nightmare they faced was only beginning to unfold. In this bleak and brutal tableau, 6,900 soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army's 51st Division had once boarded 8 transport ships at Simpson Harbor in Rabaul on the 28th of February. They had imbued these vessels with hope, believing they were destined to reinforce their comrades in Leh and to turn the tide of the fighting in New Guinea against the Allied forces. However, what they encountered instead was a reality so harsh and unrelenting that it shattered every precept of warfare they had been taught. It dismantled their notions of honor that supposedly governed the conduct of enemies, and it shook to its core every assumption about the discipline and decency of American military operations that Japanese propaganda had meticulously crafted and instilled in their minds. The stages of this ill-fated operation had been set in late December of 1942 within the high-security halls of the Imperial General Headquarters located in Tokyo. Lieutenant General Hoshi Imamura, commanding the 8th Area Army stationed at Rabaul, faced an increasingly desperate and perilous situation on the rugged terrain of New Guinea. The plan for this convoy, the lifeline that was to carry the division's most elite troops transferred from China, was born out of a detailed and strategic decision made at the highest levels of Japanese command in December. It involved a formidable armada, 8 destroyers escorting an equal number of meticulously selected transport ships, all carrying the core strength of the 51st Division, maneuvering through treacherous waters to reinforce their waning position in the southwestern Pacific theater. On February 28, 1943, the convoy set sail from Simpson Harbor in Rabaul, a formidable fleet consisting of these 8 speedy destroyers and 8 heavily laden troop transports. They were under the watchful eye of an escort comprising roughly 100 fighter aircraft, all aimed at defending the convoy from any threats the long journey might invite. At the helm of this complex and dangerous mission was Rear Admiral Masatami Kimura, who flew his command flag proudly from the bridge of the destroyer Shirayuki. A seasoned and experienced naval officer, Kimura understood the grave dangers inherent in convoy warfare, having overseen countless operations where the thin line between success and catastrophe was razor thin. The Japanese military staff, confident in their calculations, had conducted wargaming sessions that forecasted the potential losses. They estimated losing about 4 out of every 10 transports, roughly 40%, and between 30 and 40 aircraft in the process. These sobering predictions amounted to only a 50-50 chance of success, underscoring the perilous nature of this mission. As the convoy made its way along the northern coast of New Britain on that fateful first day of March in 1943, detection by Allied reconnaissance aircraft was almost immediate. A B-24 Liberator bomber, belonging to the 91st Bombardment Group of the United States Army Air Forces, was the first to spot the fleet. Yet what the Japanese hadn't yet realized was that every move and maneuver undertaken by their convoy had already been anticipated and meticulously tracked by the formidable Allied intelligence network. Through covert security operations and decrypted code breakings, most notably by signals analysts in Melbourne, and the cryptography offices of the bombing techniques employed during World War II, evolved through the innovative efforts of multiple combatant nations, each developing their own methods and strategies to maximize their effectiveness against enemy shipping and naval operations. Nations such as Italy, Australia, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States all independently conceived what came to be known as skip bombing, a technique that ingeniously allowed aircraft to target ships by skimming bombs across the water's surface, much like skipping stones across a pond. This method required meticulous planning and precise execution to ensure the bombs would bounce on the water just enough to strike the hulls of moving vessels at close range, inflicting devastating damage. One notable development in this arena was led by Major Paul Papy Gunn, who specialized in modifying B-25 Mitchell bombers for the purpose of skip bombing. These aircraft underwent significant overhauls, allowing them to carry as many as 8 forward-firing, 50-caliber machine guns directly in the nose. The combination of these heavily armed bombers with the sophisticated skip bombing technique created a new kind of airborne assault platform that could relentlessly attack ships from a relatively close, low altitude, turning the skies into floating death traps for naval targets. On March the 2nd, the dawn broke over the Bismarck Sea with a bleak gray sky cloaked in overcast clouds, signifying the calm before the storm. By 10 o'clock, however, the weather suddenly shifted as the clouds parted, revealing a formidable force of nearly 30 B-17 flying fortresses high above, ready to strike. These heavy bombers loomed large at altitude despite their distance from the water below, waiting for their moment to unleash chaos. As the attack commenced, the ferocity of the assault was immediate and overwhelming. The Japanese convoy, consisting of multiple transports and escort ships, was suddenly subjected to a concentrated aerial onslaught, resulting in the sinking of a prominent merchant vessel and the damaging of 2 others. In addition, one of the destroyers was set ablaze amid the chaos. The ship that first fell victim to the bombers was the Kyoko Maru, a vital vessel tasked with transporting 1,500 troops along with highly flammable aviation fuel. Pilots aboard the B-17S reported witnessing a horrifying sight as the Kyoko Maru was torn asunder, breaking apart and sinking swiftly beneath the waves. Its explosion was colossal, erupting into a blazing fireball that could be seen from every ship within the convoy, cast in stark relief against the morning sky. In the immediate aftermath, the destroyers Asagumo and Yukikaze swiftly moved to rescue those still struggling in the water, pulling oil-soaked sailors from the turbulent sea, exhibiting a rare act of compassion and humanity amid the chaos of war. However, these life-saving efforts were not without their dangers, as their maneuvering at reduced speed made them easier targets for retaliation from enemy aircraft or submarines. By the morning of March the 3rd, the weather had cleared to near perfection. With a beautiful blue sky and gentle breezes, conditions for aerial combat and rescue operations were ideal. The convoy had already traveled approximately two-thirds of its journey from Leh, having limited its number of transports and escort vessels to only 7 and 8 respectively, marking a significant loss from its original strength. As the clock struck 10 in the morning, another wave of deadly attack unfolded, and from multiple directions, disaster struck. All Japan's tactical plans unraveled in just a quarter hour. The unrelenting assault shattered their coordinated efforts. That fateful morning saw the Japanese fleet decimate and disintegrate rather swiftly. First, high-altitude B-17 bombers drew Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns skyward, laser targeting these defenses and siphoning their attention upward. During this diversion, a squadron of Australian fighters, specifically 13 of the rugged bow fighters, swooped down at mast height, their 8 forward-firing guns unleashing a relentless and destructive barrage on the decks below. Immediately following this aerial assault were the modified B-25s, nearing at an extremely low altitude, their prop wash disturbing the calm water with each swooping pass, enabling their skip bombs to perform their deadly dance upon the ship's hulls. The skip bombing technique proved to be extraordinarily effective, its namesake tactic involving bombs that skipped across the water's surface like stones, bouncing upon impact against the ship's hulls before detonating. In some cases, the bombs ricocheted into the side of targets and exploded internally, while others floated into the water again before exploding adjacent to a vessel's side, inflicting maximum damage. Captain Ed Lana, who led the 91st Squadron's modified B-25s, approached the largest target at wave height, a transport named the Teomaru. Calmly, he approached while his guns cut down the ship's anti-aircraft defenses and then released his bombs. The bombs skipped twice across the shimmering water before striking the hull at the waterline, dealing a devastating blow. The massive 6,870-ton transport was shattered in half and rapidly sank. On that turbulent, tumultuous day, the surface of the sea was mercilessly churned and obscured by a thick, dark coating of bunker fuel, creating a deadly tableau strewn with downed aircraft wreckage, scattered debris, and the anguished bodies of thousands of men. The waters were teeming with chaos, overwhelmed with the horrifying sight of soldiers and sailors caught in a desperate struggle for survival. Among them were men who could not swim, exhausted sailors barely clinging to floating wreckage, and wounded individuals desperately gripping the remnants of their ships or life jackets in hopes of rescue. An estimated 3,000 or more men struggled in the water, with official conservative figures placing their number well above this count. Amidst this chaos, the 4 remaining destroyers, Yukikaze, Asagumo, Uranami, and Shikanami, mobilized swiftly to initiate rescue operations, attempting to save as many lives as possible despite the overwhelming odds. These destroyers managed to evacuate roughly 2,700 survivors to the safety of Rabaul, a task that, while critical, was limited in scope given the relentless return of enemy aircraft. The Allied planes, ever persistent, returned at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on March 3rd with intentions that would mark a dark chapter in this conflict. What the survivors initially thought was a reprieve, that the approaching aircraft might be just photographing the destruction or attempting to assess the damage, soon turned into a terrifying ordeal. As the aircraft descended to wave height, deadly guns opened fire, unleashing a fierce and indiscriminate attack on the vulnerable survivors. In a move that later sparked widespread controversy and moral debate, Allied forces maintained a patrol in the waters for several subsequent days during which they strafed survivors attempting to reach safety in their lifeboats. From the American perspective, such actions were deemed necessary to curb the potential threat posed by fleeing enemy soldiers. Soldiers who, if allowed to reach the shoreline, could rejoin Japanese forces and bolster their defenses in Leh. This justification was fiercely disputed by many, as it involved attacking helpless, unarmed individuals drifting in the water, a practice that starkly contradicted conventional notions of honorable warfare. The aircraft involved in these operations included B-25 Mitchell bombers, A-20 Havocs and American fighters, bow fighters and P-38 Lightning planes, each making numerous passes across the water, their machine guns raking through the surf to churn it into foam and forcing survivors below the surface. From the viewpoint of the American military, the rationale behind such brutal actions was straightforward. These were enemy soldiers, and preventing them from regrouping or reaching the shore was seen as a tactical necessity. By destroying those in the water, they believed they were preventing the Japanese from reinforcing their garrison at Leh. The strafing of survivors, many of whom could be categorized as prisoners of war or mere refugees, was in their eyes a measure aimed at restricting the enemy's capacity to resupply and regroup. Orders from General Kenny underscored this demand clearly and uncompromisingly. No Japanese soldier was to be allowed to reach New Guinea alive. For the Japanese personnel struggling in the water, these actions struck at the very core of their sense of honor, a concept deeply rooted in Bushido, which emphasized dignity and humane treatment of defeated foes. However, what they experienced that day was anything but respectful or honorable. They were shot at indiscriminately, and the very principle of fair combat was shattered by the indiscriminate destruction wreaked from the air and sea. Darkness arrived on March 3rd, casting a pall over the devastated waters, while the entry of American patrol torpedo, PT boats, marked a sinister escalation. Under the command of Lieutenant Commander Barry Atkins, a fleet of 10 U.S. Navy PT boats set forth into the night, conducting irregular and relentless hunts for survivors in the chaotic, debris-laden sea. Their searchlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the water as they methodically swept through the aftermath of the destruction. Their machine guns tore into the surface, strafing anything that moved with cold precision. The night became a nightmare for those in the water, as the PT boats located a damaged transport called Oawa Maru, still afloat despite severe damage, and launched torpedoes to sink her a second time, plunging more men into the turbulent depths. The horrors for the Japanese survivors grew even more terrifying with the arrival of predatory sharks attracted by the blood and the frantic thrashing of those struggling in the water. These predators, driven by instinct, attacked men who had already endured the sinking of their vessel and the strafing from aircraft, now facing a new death beneath the waves. It was an unthinkable, brutal addition to an already devastating disaster. As dawn broke on March 4th, the full extent of the catastrophe was painfully revealed across a sea strewn with debris, a sprawling, ghastly debris field extending for about 40 miles. Small clusters of survivors, many of whom had endured over 20 hours of ordeal in the aircraft descended swiftly and decisively, rushing to their respective targets in the chaotic night skies. In their relentless pursuit, they often took along some of the bravest and most unfortunate soldiers who were desperately seeking refuge or rescue. These moments of desperation were marked not just by the furious air battles, but also by the grim justification provided by the American pilots, who argued that their aggressive strafing assaults were both a necessary tactical move and an act of punishment, revenge even, for the atrocities attitudes witnessed during these encounters. This reasoning was compellingly documented by James Duffy in his detailed account of the conflict, titled War at the End of the World, where he recounts a chilling incident involving a B-17 bomber, affectionately named the Double Trouble, leading by Lieutenant Woodrow W. Moore. According to Duffy's narrative, during an intense engagement, the Double Trouble collided with a Japanese Zero, an event that immediately became a catalyst for further violence. As 7 members of the bomber crew evacuated via parachutes, they became vulnerable targets, with Japanese fighters ruthlessly gunning them down as they drifted helplessly in the air. This brutal act was witnessed firsthand by other American bomber crews who were among the few to observe this horrifying spectacle. The incident exasperated the American pilots and crew members, fueling their furor and solidifying their resolve for vengeance. In the aftermath, General Kenny characterized these relentless anti-Japanese strikes as mopping up operations, shorthand for a brutal and uncompromising effort to eliminate enemy remnants and survivors. Over the following days, American and Australian airmen persisted in their mission, repeatedly returning to the battleground site to comb the seas in a relentless hunt for Japanese sailors and soldiers who might still be alive. As an extension of this vicious campaign, General Kenny issued orders for his crews to target, strafe, and destroy Japanese lifeboats and rafts, citing these missions as part of his official mopping up strategy. These actions, conducted under the cover of secrecy, were documented in a confidential report dated the 20th of March, 1943. The report grimly narrated how the slaughter extended well into the night, emphasizing that any survivors who managed to escape the strafing runs and slip into the water at least 30 miles from land faced a peril far graver than the initial attacks, being in waters teeming with man-eating sharks, a natural horror that greatly compounded their misery. Meanwhile, Japanese submarines 33 and 26, operating cautiously to avoid detection from superior American air patrols, attempted rescue efforts amid dreadful odds. On the 6th of March, 1943, these submarines successfully recovered a total of 170 men, survivors of the chaos and destruction wreaked on that fateful day. Just 2 days later, the 26th submarine managed to locate an additional 54 castaways, and these unfortunate souls were eventually brought ashore at Leh. However, the limitations of these submarines' capacities meant that the majority of stranded personnel, hundreds in total, remained behind in treacherous waters. The crews aboard these submarines vividly described the devastating scenes they encountered, recounting how they heard call-outs in the darkness and saw oil-slicked and exhausted men too weak to climb aboard, clutching their hopes tightly before being rescued. The scenario forced a grim and agonizing choice: who to save and who to leave behind. The statistics linked to this tragedy underscored the enormous scale of human loss. Out of approximately 6,900 soldiers desperately needed in New Guinea, only about 1,200 had managed to reach Leh, their intended destination. Over 2,700 others were saved and brought back to safety by destroyers and submarines, eventually reaching the port of Rabaul. Tragically, an estimated 3,000 Japanese troops, including sailors and soldiers, were killed during the chaos and combat. Despite the heavy losses on the Japanese side, the American forces suffered remarkably minimal casualties, with only 4 aircraft lost and 13 airmen killed. This inflicted a casualty ratio of roughly 230 to 1, astonishingly high in the context of naval combat and indicative of the overwhelming dominance of Allied air power during these operations. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea proved to be a decisive turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II. The devastating losses suffered by Japan effectively signaled the end of their willingness to risk advancing large convoy ships through waters under the control of Allied aircraft. From that point onward, Japan refrained from attempting to reinforce their garrisons by surface shipping within the range of Allied air dominance, an important strategic shift. After the war's conclusion, Captain Tamichihara, who had commanded the destroyer Shigura but was not present at the battle itself, conducted interviews with survivors and authored what became known as the most authoritative Japanese account of this disastrous event. According to Tamichihara's interviews, the defeat experienced during this operation marked an unparalleled fiasco. He described it as the complete antith during World War II. The skies over the Southwest Pacific Theater witnessed incredible innovations and fierce battles involving both daring pilots and pioneering engineers. A notable figure in this arena was Major William Benn of the 63rd Squadron, part of the 43rd Bomb Group, which was part of the 5th Air Force within the United States Army Air Forces. His contributions extended beyond mere flying. He played a crucial role in the development and operational deployment of specialized aircraft and weaponry designed to maximize destruction against enemy targets, especially in the challenging environments of the Pacific. One of Major William Benn's significant achievements involved the adaptation of transport aircraft, transforming them into formidable flying battleships capable of delivering devastating blows. Meanwhile, another notable figure was Major Paul Pippy Guns, a skilled aircraft engineer and pilot who orchestrated modification initiatives that revolutionized the so-called strafer aircraft. These modifications turned the planes, specifically variants of the A-20 and the B-25 bombers, into lethal weapons platforms equipped with 8 to 14 forward-mounted 50 caliber machine guns. These heavily armed aircraft could tear through anti-aircraft defenses with incredible precision and ferocity before executing their primary bombing runs at almost point-blank ranges, striking targets with a level of brutality that left enemies with little hope of survival. However, the combat did not always end in destruction upon reaching the water. Many survivors of these violent encounters managed to survive beyond the initial attack. Overwhelmed but resilient, small groups of airmen and sailors found themselves cut off from rescue, stranded on remote islands or adrift in the vast Pacific Ocean. Their struggles for survival began immediately, often under dire circumstances, as they faced the harsh elements, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of enemy patrols. Some of these desperate groups managed to reach nearby islands, though their journeys often ended in perilous captures or violent encounters. For instance, a group of 18 survivors managed to land on Kerwin Island, only to fall into the hands of Japanese forces operating aboard the PD boat PT-114. Their faith in salvation was short-lived, as they found themselves prisoners of war shortly afterward. Other survivors made a more harrowing journey to Guadalcanal, but were hunted down and killed by American patrols, illustrating the brutal complexities and unintended consequences of wartime navigation and combat. On Goodenough Island, a remote atoll in the Pacific, Australian patrols were actively engaged in hunting down Japanese remnants. Between the 8th and 14th of March in the year 1943, these patrols, functioning as part of the Australian Army's 47th Infantry Battalion, launched a devastating offensive against Japanese survivors. They encountered and annihilated 72 Japanese soldiers, took 42 prisoners, and recovered 9 additional bodies on a raft, highlighting the brutal and relentless nature of these small-scale clashes. It was only after the war concluded that the Japanese military learned the full extent of their defeat. Their entire convoy, which had been deemed by command to be safely out of reach, had been deliberately trapped and decisively defeated. The Allies, utilizing their extraordinary intelligence capabilities, had intercepted and deciphered Japanese communications long before the engagement on Goodenough Island. Signals intelligence specialists in Melbourne, Australia, and Washington, D.C. had cracked coded messages revealing the entire plan: destination, approximate arrival date, composition of ships, and route. Every vital detail had been known to Allied forces well in advance, giving them a strategic advantage. The Japanese, stubborn in their confidence that their coding systems were unbreakable, confidently sailed into this meticulously prepared trap, unaware that their adversaries possessed detailed foreknowledge. For the Japanese military hierarchy, particularly those adhering strongly to the Bushido Code, this event created a profound crisis. Bushido emphasized principles such as honor in combat, respect for enemies, dignity even in the face of defeat, and the importance of rivalry and loyalty. The methodical killing of helpless men, many of whom were left stranded or drowning in the water after their aircraft were shot down, directly contradicted these core tenets. It was in their eyes an act of ultimate dishonor and a betrayal of their cultural code. Those Japanese survivors who managed to return to the captured territory of Rabaul were often deeply affected by the encounter. They had witnessed firsthand the ruthlessness of American military tactics, an approach that starkly contrasted with the propaganda that painted Americans as weak or hesitant. The chilling sight of aircraft systematically hunting and gunning down men in the water, caught in a relentless and merciless sweep, would haunt Japanese forces for years to come across the Pacific Islands. Many of the survivors who lived through this ordeal lost their faith in the idea of victory altogether. They began questioning the perceived invincibility and moral superiority they had believed in prior to their encounters with American forces. The horrific realization that American aircraft could machine gun helpless men in the water prompted many to contemplate the possibility that denying surrender might be a matter of tactical necessity for the Allies, a brutal and controversial tactic in wartime ethics. The strafing of drowning survivors, especially those 75 miles distant, a strategic location that symbolized much more than just a point on a map. It implied that countless ships and aircraft could potentially reach the shores, threatening the safety and security of Japanese-controlled territories. The harrowing experience of the Bismarck Sea disaster struck a deep chord within Japan's military leadership, prompting a comprehensive and critical reevaluation of their entire strategic approach to naval warfare and regional defense. In the aftermath of the catastrophic defeat, Admiral Minichi Koga, who had recently succeeded the legendary Admiral Yamamoto as the commander-in-chief of the Japanese fleet, understood with stark clarity that surface ships, no matter how formidable or well-armed, stood little chance of survival in waters now dominated by the relentless encroachment of enemy air power. Recognizing this, Japanese authorities effectively abandoned New Guinea as an outpost, deeming any holdout there was simply indefensible given the prevailing air threat and the deteriorating overall strategic situation. The psychological reverberations of this defeat, its impact extending well beyond mere military figures, began to ripple through the ranks of Japanese forces at all levels. Troops who were slated for transport or reinforcement began deserting at unprecedented rates, driven by fear and a palpable sense of impending doom. The threat of being trapped at sea and caught in the sight of American aircraft, equipped with modern technology and operational tactics, became an overwhelming terror that overshadowed even the horrors of combat itself. Meanwhile, from the American perspective, the battle irrevocably demonstrated the paramount importance and effectiveness of air power in modern naval warfare. It became evident that with appropriately trained and well-equipped aircraft based on land, even without the need for carrier groups, an air force could dominate and control vital sea lanes. This realization significantly influenced the Pacific Theater's overall strategic planning for the remainder of the war. Decades after the conflict concluded, debate persisted quietly over whether the strafing of surrendered or retreating enemy personnel could be considered a war crime. This issue was discussed with some intensity, but ultimately no convictions or prosecutions arose. The official American stance contended that these actions involved enemy combatants, individuals who could have, under different circumstances, managed to reach shore and continue fighting. The fact that many Japanese officers were executed for similar acts by their own government cast light on the complexities of justice during wartime. It reflected the uncertain morality of war's brutal realities, a brutal honesty that revealed both sides had crossed lines, yet only the losing side faced the consequences of those crossings in the post-war judgment process. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea has since been recognized by military historians as a pivotal moment, a true watershed in the evolution of aerial warfare. The raw statistics support this characterization. All 8 Japanese transports were sunk, 4 destroyers were destroyed, and approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors lost their lives, while Australian and American airmen suffered the loss of only 13 of their comrades. Yet beyond these numbers, the battle represented a profound transformation in the very nature of war. Advancements in technology and intelligence had dramatically altered casualty ratios, turning what might once have been costly but traditional engagements into near massacre. The image of aircraft systematically strafing helpless men, women and children, prisoners and combatants alike, became emblematic of the brutal and merciless character of the Pacific War. Such tactics, ruthless and efficient, signified an evolution that went far beyond mere strategy. They symbolized a new paradigm where material destruction and psychological terror reigned supreme. General Douglas MacArthur, who was overseeing Allied operations in the Southwest Pacific, referred to this engagement as the decisive aerial confrontation of the entire campaign. This was not a hyperbolic claim, but an accurate assessment. Japan would never again regain the strategic initiative in New Guinea. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea stood as a stark demonstration that modern warfare, armed not only with advanced aircraft, but supported by intelligence and technological innovation, had evolved past the traditional ideas of combat between armed forces and armies. In this new reality, the combination of air power and technological mastery was capable not merely of winning battles, but of annihilating entire fleets and disrupting entire supply lines. For Japan, this battle marked the beginning of their strategic decline in the Southwest Pacific. With their inability to reinforce or resupply garrisons deep within Allied air range, Japanese forces found themselves condemned to isolation, slowly strangled by the relentless capabilities of Allied air superiority. Support and reinforcement ceased to be feasible, and the Japanese presence in the region was effectively destined for eventual destruction and surrender. From the American point of view, this epoch, shaped by the lessons of Pearl Harbor and subsequent battles, had transformed from one of stunned victimhood to a systematic pursuit of ruthless efficiency. The United States, which had entered the war so unexpectedly and with shock at the attack on Pearl Harbor, had become capable of meticulously destroying thousands of enemy troops, ships, and aircraft with calculated precision. This evolution highlighted the moral and tactical complexities of warfare. The controversy over the strafing of survivors and fleeing enemies underscores the harsh moral dilemmas that military necessity, and among the most decisive and fiercely contested engagements of World War II, lies an event that not only altered strategic considerations, but also left profound psychological scars that lingered long after the conflict ended. Over the course of just 3 days, American and Australian air forces launched a relentless offensive against a Japanese maritime convoy. Their operations culminated in the complete destruction of the convoy, resulting in thousands of Japanese lives lost in what would come to be remembered as one of the war's most brutal and controversial episodes. This victory effectively cut off Tokyo's chances to reinforce their forces on New Guinea by sea, thereby shaping the course of the Pacific Campaign. The aftermath of this assault was deeply disturbing. Japanese survivors who had moments before been helplessly drifting in the water were suddenly strafed by American aircraft, an act that horrified witnesses both at the time and in subsequent historical accounts. This savage scene of aircraft unleashing deadly gunfire upon defenseless men bobbing in the ocean left wounds in the minds of the Japanese that never fully healed. The survivors, many of whom managed to escape the slaughter with their lives, carried the psychological burden of having encountered an adversary capable of unspeakable ruthlessness, something far beyond what they could have ever anticipated. This act of relentless brutality shattered deeply held beliefs about American military weakness and fundamentally challenged preconceptions about warfare itself, which many had previously viewed through a lens of rules, honor, and chivalry. The significance of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea extended well beyond the immediate tactical outcome. It served as a stark demonstration of how air power alone could dominate maritime routes, showcasing the astonishing ability of modern air forces to exert control over vast sea lanes with devastating precision. At the same time, it underscored the critical importance of intelligence gatherers and analysts in shaping effective military strategies during a period defined by technological innovation and rapid tactical shifts. Moreover, the episode illuminated the moral ambiguities inherent in total war, where the lines between justified military action and monstrous acts often blurred amidst the chaos of relentless combat. The image that haunts historians and veterans alike remains the sight of aircraft systematically targeting survivors in the water, a moment that continues to evoke discomfort and moral debate to this day. In the grim tally of casualties, approximately 3,000 Japanese sailors met their end, not in the honor-bound traditional sense of frontline combat, but through a calculated and ruthless slaughter wrought from relentless aerial assault. Their shattered bodies and panicked survivors who returned to spread tales of American ruthlessness left a deep psychological imprint, notably influencing Japanese military morale and resolve for the remainder of the war. This harrowing event demonstrated explicitly that, in the context of modern warfare, technological superiority could decimate entire forces and destroy entire fleets with chilling efficiency. The Japanese, witnessing this brutal display, experienced a profound shock, realizing that their enemies had evolved into something more terrifying than propaganda had ever portrayed. The willingness of the Americans to kill without mercy or hesitation, an uncompromising readiness to seek total destruction, redefined the very nature of the conflict, revealing a brutality that would define the Pacific War's increasingly savage character. The brutal lessons learned over those 3 days in March of 1943 would resonate throughout the remaining years of the conflict, ultimately culminating in the devastating deployment of atomic bombs. The violent awakening at the Battle of the Bismarck Sea signaled a significant shift. Conventional notions of war as a noble or limited endeavor gave way to a reality shaped by blood, terror, and an uncompromising pursuit of victory at any cost. This episode stands as a poignant reminder of how modern technological capabilities amplified the lethal efficiency of warfare, and how the staggering brutality of the Pacific theater left scars on history's collective conscience that endure to this day.